I'm Beryl Dakers, and I just want to thank you all for the tremendous support that we have had for this production. It has been an amazing journey, and we are extremely grateful for both the interest and the support that we've received. You know, with so much available for you to watch these days, I cannot tell you how reassuring it is and how encouraging it is to have you join us for this screening and to continue to look at the programs that were developed for the Suffrage Association. Secondly, I'm wearing a couple of hats tonight. So I do want to echo my partner's sentiments in terms of welcoming you on behalf of the University South Caroliniana Society. We were thrilled to be able to join forces with ETV, with the ETV Endowment, and of course the Center for Civil Rights History and Research at the University of South Carolina. This is a part of our fall program at USCS. And this is an organization that's been around for about 84 years. Our mission is to collect and preserve materials relating to the history of the Palmetto State and to promote knowledge and a better understanding of that history, as well as that culture. While we have a wonderful collection at the South Caroliniana Library, now more than ever, we recognize the need to expand, to enrich our holdings, to be more inclusive, and to share with our populace and the world, as well as to help our citizens come to appreciate their own history, their legacy, their treasures. I would be remiss if I did not invite you to join the Society or to consider sharing your papers, your treasures, your unique stories with the South Caroliniana Library. Our archivists are ever on the hunt for new material to enhance our collection. Thank you.
We're going to pause now for our panelist discussion. And in case you did not know, that was Beryl Dakers. So Beryl Dakers will serve as our moderator tonight for this extraordinary panel. She began her career as the first African-American on-air news reporter for WIS Radio. She is a highly decorated journalist and served as the director of cultural programming at South Carolina Educational Television. As you now know, she is the executive producer of the ETV series Sisterhood, South Carolina Suffragist. In addition to a long record of achievements in television, Ms. Dakers has served as the chair of the Columbia Urban League and has been a member of a number of arts and humanities boards. I'm very pleased to serve with her as she serves as the president of the South Caroliniana Society. We're also joined by two of my colleagues, and this is a history department reunion tonight. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Marjorie Spruill, who is Distinguished Professor Emerita of History from our university. She is the author of New Women of the New South. She's also the author of Divided We Stand, and also the editor of One Woman, One Vote. She is also a former member of the South Caroliniana Society. I'm also pleased to be joined by my colleague, Belinda Littlefield, and we go way back. We came on this campus together many, many years ago. Dr. Littlefield is a professor of history. She is the former director of the African American Studies program, and she was the co-chair of the Presidential Commission on University History. She is the co-editor of South Carolina Women, Their Lives and Times, and she's also the editor of a newly published volume by the University of South Carolina Press entitled 101 Women Who Shaped South Carolina. She is also a former member of the South Caroliniana Society. And we're also very pleased to be joined by our distinguished guests, my new best friend, Carol Ione Lewis, also known as Ione, author, playwright, and poet whose works include Pride of Family, 4 Generations of African American Women of Color. Several years ago, She wrote about receiving the diary of her great grandmother. She said the following: I had an idea when I opened that diary that it would take over my life, and it has. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished panelists for this evening.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And I think Bobby just set the tone for us and decided where we would start our conversation. And that would be with our special guest, Carol Ione Lewis, hereafter called Ione. And Ione, Bobby says it took over your life. Would you share with us just briefly that January 1st, 1968 reading
All right.
of Frances Rollins' diary? Ione is the great-granddaughter of Frances Rollins, the eldest Rollins sister.
I'd be happy to do that. I could read you more than that. But I will read
Maybe
you.
another occasion.
I'm just kidding. I will read you that entry. So this is the moment of my opening the little diary that was sent to me by my mother, and reading it by myself while my young children were asleep. January 1st, Boston, Mass. A rainy, gloomy day. Speeches tonight at the Tremont Temple, but so terribly rainy that there's no possibility of my reaching there. I sent a letter to Mother today, which I wrote last night, the latest hour nearly of the old year. The year renews its birth today with all of its hopes and sorrows. Uncertainty and doubt are in its wake. To me and mine, I know not, but may God enable me, whatever may be my lot, to murmur not, but patiently bear and wait and labor.
It's an amazing, amazing introduction to a year that would be pivotal in the lives of the Rollins sisters. Marjorie, I'm going to go to you to perhaps set the stage for us as to the world that the Rollins sisters inhabited.
Well, and their experience was just extraordinary, even within the time that they lived. I would say they certainly as they grew up, they did not live a typical experience for an African American in the South. Very privileged, elite background with parents who had the means and the determination to educate them. But then I think you're thinking more about the Reconstruction era, which was, just a time of infinite possibilities and undreamed of change in a way, and then often, with some great ambitions that were there, and some great courage shown, and then just major accomplishments, including the integration of this university to a greater degree. It was unique at the time and stands unique as the earliest one to be fully integrated. And then this extraordinary constitution that you were speaking of, and the fact that African American women in a southern state were taking the lead in pushing for the enfranchisement of women at a time when it was just beginning to be done formally at the national level. It's just there's so much about these sisters that is extraordinary. People refer to them as the fabulous Rollins sisters. And everyone who hears about them is amazed by their story. And as someone who's worked on the women's suffrage story for a long time, it's really amazing how much many people in the world are still finding out about them. As much as of an effort as we've all made to bring them to people's attention. And I must say that this wonderful film that you produced, that we all had the privilege of working on with you, is going to go a long way towards bringing them to people's attention in a way that they never had before. And I'm just thrilled to be a part of it and congratulate you on it.
Well, thank you. Why is this story so important, especially today?
You're looking at me. Go ahead.
Well, we're right back where the Rollins sisters were when they left South Carolina. We're right back in that pivotal moment of war, civil war, attractions that have to continue to be fought against. So the story continues, and we must continue to resist and to create the equality that was envisioned by these people. The equality, the ability to have equality among the races, to have a real government, to have a government that was mixed, to have beautiful and important women working in the government and also politicians and being a part of things. All of that is at risk again, really. And so it's important to know what was happening then so that we can really know what to do now.
Val, how could women who were obviously so influential at that point in time, how could their stories have been suppressed? Why is it that we don't know anything about them?
Well, there's several points of entry to that question. Part of it is the Reconstruction period itself. As Marjorie and both Iona have talked about, this is a period of possibilities. This is a period of change. But it's also a period of violence, and it's a period of rejection of this change, like we're having now, the backlash. And so once Reconstruction ends, you then have several entry points of denial, denial, denial. Rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. And so you have, I'll start with the Dunning group. This is William Dunning, a historian and a political scientist at Columbia University, who trains lots and lots of historians who end up taking over basically history departments. And what they teach is that this period was corrupt, although it wasn't any more corrupt than any other period we've had in government, that African Americans should not have had the kind of leeway that they had. We can never go back to this. So a rewriting of what the things that were accomplished during Reconstruction. Then you have a Ben Tillman here who would argue in the 1890s that the way to protect a woman's virtue, the best two things to happen, lynching, where people can't monkey around with someone else's woman. And then the other statement was that husbands had the right to shoot any man who slept with their wife or their daughter.
The unwritten law.
The unwritten law, yes. And you know, you just don't get punished for those kinds of things. And so when you think about that Reconstruction period, and then you get the DAR, the daughters, writing and making sure that certain things aren't put in history books for decades. And so you've got one of the founders of the grandfather of professional historian group, the American Historical Association. That goes on from the 1900s to the 1960s. Now, of course, you get a Du Bois who fights against this rewriting of Reconstruction in 1935, but the major historians and the major people who are buying the books and writing the books are along the Dunning School.
That's it.
That nothing good came out of Reconstruction, and we had to be redeemed. And so the Rollins sisters, along with all sorts of other accomplishments and people who did great things, just get snuffed out.
And to build on what Val said, so Reconstruction itself was so misrepresented for 100 years, and historians then, following Du Bois' then took the lead in trying to rectify it, but in part because of the influence of American culture and cinema, everything from Birth of the Nation to Gone with the Wind, it's been extraordinarily difficult to get to the American public the real story of Reconstruction was. I mean, it's one of the darndest things I've ever seen. I have started so many History 112s at this university with the story about the myth of Reconstruction, and in a room almost as big as this, I have people look at me like, what? That's not the way it was, and it's really hard to, and of course now we are having a cultural reckoning about the real story of what went on. And we're learning increasingly that those monuments didn't go up in 1860s, but they went up in 1890s when the Civil War generation was starting to die out, and were desperately worried that they wanted to make sure people remembered it the right way. And then women, white women in the South, just took an extraordinary leadership role in making sure that white supremacy and states' rights continued to be honored values and preeminent political goals in the South. And through the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and there's great scholarship now by, I'm proud to say, my first graduate student, Karen Cox, that I years ago, and her book, it won a prize at the time, but now she is in demand all over the world because of her work explaining the role that the UDC played in perpetuating these myths, not only by collecting relics, but also by writing history books, and by extensive lobbying of politicians to make sure that, you talk about political correctness, they insisted on this version of Reconstruction that Val's describing be the only one allowed to be taught in this part of the world, and made sure that there were pictures of Jeff Davis and Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson in every classroom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's, one reason. And then the other one is that the story of the suffrage movement. It was amazing to me when I first started working on the Southern suffrage movement. It was this was in the 1970s and 80s that I was working on this at first, and I could find very little out there about the movement in the South, aside from one chapter in Anne Scott's Southern Lady, one chapter in Island Creditors, the ideas of the women's suffrage movement, one biography of Laura Clay, and half a dozen master's theses. That was pretty much it. And part of that is because women's history, only people started paying attention to that beginning around the 60s, and then the suffrage movement people want to write about the success story. So the narrative for so many years was how it got started in New England and then a little bit about the first victories in the West. But I found I had almost a free reign, empty field there to write about the Southern movement because it had been so badly neglected. But then on top of that, the focus on African American women, my book had race on every page, but it was less about African American women because it was the story of the organized suffrage movement in the South beginning in the 1890s and this racist strategy. It was not a heroic tale. It was a tale that quite the opposite, that told about this, in this period of extraordinary suppression of votes and the restriction of the suffrage and fighting back against Reconstruction, how this handful of white women was trying to get the vote and had no chance in hell, and how the South was the nemesis of the suffrage movement. It was the last place it was successful, and it had the fewest victories and almost killed the whole project. If one person hadn't changed his mind in 1920 in Tennessee, as we made a documentary about. So Rosalind Terborg Penn was an African-American historian who, despite all of the obstacles against her, dug in and researched for years and years and years the history of African-American women's role in the women's suffrage movement. And she already had her dissertation out there a few years ahead of mine, but she, Oxford University Press published mine. She had a hard time even getting it published because every press was telling her, well, nobody's going to want to read it when it's only about African American suffragists. She got told this over and over and over again until she finally got it out there. Okay, I'm going on too long. Sorry.
I want to give Ione a chance to talk about how difficult it was for her to research her ancestors and to find out about this. Because even now, I tell people all the time, when you watch that documentary, you notice that we use drawings extensively and we have to go to newspaper clippings and we searched all over. I'm telling you folks, that history that is so important is still entrenched in secrecy. It's shrouded and it's difficult to come upon. So here we have a great-granddaughter who has been aroused by just listening to the words written in her great-grandmother's diary, who wants to know the story and who thinks she's going to go out and immediately tell the world all about it. And it wasn't that easy.
Well, no, it was 18 years from the start, from what I read you to the time when the book actually came out. 18 years of research, and the extraordinary thing is that the book emerged right on the eve of the digital revolution, meaning that now you can just push a button here and push a button there, and the world can begin to open to you. But at that time, I had to become my own kind of historian in order to find out what was happening. This was about 73 when I was opening up the diary. There were, at that time, it was not like today where there are many African American studies programs and things of that sort. It was not common to think about them or talk about them. There were not many. It was the beginning of the women's movement. I was very involved in the women's movement at that time. Kind of a meta-feminist at the time, and I realized that the men in the family had been written about, and I knew about them, and I could find things in the library about them. But I knew nothing about the women. They never talked about themselves. So I began to talk to the women in the family, and what I wondered when I was reading this, and I did know immediately, this is like a depth charge, you know, in my life now. It's never going to be the same again. It's going to take over, and it did. On a quest for Frances Anne Rowland and her sisters, particularly Frank, and who was this woman? I had no idea. No one had told me. My mother hadn't told me who she was. I didn't know about the diary, which had been in my mother's drawer till I was a young mother myself. So I really had to begin to go to libraries, go to colleges, go to universities, find primary scholars at the time, look at microfilm, and all of those things. So I did come to Charleston, I did come to Columbia, I did research in Savannah, I did research in Paris, I did research. I couldn't get to Saint-Domingue, but now I can touch a button and get into Saint-Domingue.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited. So once what you're realizing too is that once you begin this kind of work, it never ends, you know. So at a certain point, I had to finish the book because my publishers needed me to do that. But there's another book coming. Very, 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 very arduous. My children were little, so I had to raise the children, have a marriage, and the things that entails. I had to find an agent. I wrote about it for the early Ms. magazine, and I had. It took a long time for them to publish it, and I was despondent, actually. It finally came out, and it had the photos, and it was called Discovering My Foremothers. And I was talking about this earlier. This was a shocking term at the time. People were like, "What are you talking about? It's for fathers, you know." But I claim that it's the earliest, if not the only representation in literature at that time, that kind of magazine, of the term. Now it's so common. I love it. But every time I hear it, I say, yes, I said that. I did that. So there was that, and finding agents, finding the wrong agent, and then finding the right agents. I had written another piece about it for the Village Voice, which had lots of photos. And I was a freelance writer, so I was able to do a lot of research in that way, and I got the clips that I needed to show people that yes, this woman can write something, and they could see the images of these beautiful, extraordinary beings. And I got the contract that led eventually to this book.
What is the real legacy of the Rollins sisters? And I'd like for each of you to take a stab at that. What is their legacy? I mean, this history's been buried for so long.
Yeah.
What does it mean that we're now uncovering it?
I think for me, their legacy is the fact that they do open the door for the suffrage movement, but they also open the door with a very mixed group of people, male, females, black, white, those who are in the government, those who are not in the government. And I think that's extremely important when you're thinking about how do you make a change. Northerners and Southerners. So you're talking about a very diverse group of people who are fighting for the same thing. And, when you get to the 1890s, you don't get that. I mean, that is just wiped out. And it is one of those what ifs we could have continued along that democratic lane. And we didn't. And I think their legacy is it can be done. It was done. They've shown us it could be done, that the work could be done together. And for me, that's the strongest legacy.
Marjorie?
They're inspirational. They're first in so many ways. They're example of, even in the worst political climates, there have been some women who have found a way to exercise influence, and that they had the audacity to reject the idea that they should only be allowed to have influence through their influence on men. And yet they had the practical smarts to know that in the world in which the only way they could exercise influence was through men, they had this salon, and they did it. They entertained, they were charming, they looked and acted the way that men expected women who got their attention to act, and they had an opportunity to talk to them, encourage them, and to do certain things. And throughout our history, that's one of the things that women have, this fine line women have had to cross between even those who, like them, are rejecting the idea that this is the only way to have influence, are still having influence in the ways that they can. Getting people together. I mean, there's the history of salons. That word, it reflects on different times when, from Dolly Madison to some of the famous women during the era of the French philosophers, were getting people together to talk about things, bringing them together in their homes and saying, I'm going to get you all together here to discuss things.
Well, that's so interesting to me, because I just assumed that a salon was a natural mechanism for them given their French upbringing. I mean, that was the mode.
The French connection.
They were very connected to the French, and the earlier salons and the earlier groups of women in France who were so 16th, 17th century, and they were reading their works. They had, and so they were inspired by that, and also probably the Dolly Madison as well, who was inspired by the French, I'm sure, too.
And they were being compared to these women who had held salons in France by name in these newspaper articles.
Yes,
In the New York papers.
I asked the question about the legacy, and for you, why is it, your life's work now, why is it so important that you share their remarkable accomplishments with the world, really?
well, that's what they wanted. Frances Anne Rollin wanted to make her mark in literature. She got all involved with politics, and it was a little derailed from the literary element, but she wrote a wonderful book, and I want to get that book, the book that she wrote, actually more attention as well in a literary way, which was the biography of Martin Delany. So there's that, and what did you ask me? You wanted to know why?
Their legacy. Yeah, what is their legacy, and why is it important for you to share it with the world?
Well, the legacy also relates to women's solidarity among women, and what women can do in groups and circles, which I replicated, and I created a group that's called Women's Mysteries, in which women, and now men are involved as well, but we're finding that there's much to reclaim among women when women are together, and that's the inherent wisdom of women and the inherent knowledge. Well, it's the wisdom, but also assisting women to claim their power, their anger, in a positive way, and to go out there and be creative and be all that they can be. Because I thought when the women's movement had happened, I thought, oh, there's been a women's movement, so everything's okay now. No, it wasn't okay. And I found that young women were very much in need of support and of that kind of inspiration from other women in circles where they can develop a Sanal type of understanding of each other and how to be in the world. So yeah, I think that for me it's important because I wanted to find Frances Ann Rowland. And I want to find more of the sisters. I found a lot of all of them, but as time passes, I realize there's more and more. Yeah. And it's and I'm also feeling that they had training that was also coming out of that home, out of their home. Even though Rowland was a patrician, it was a patrician thing, but something was going on there. Had to be, for them to be so pro people of color, so pro suffrage, and all of that. They also had to have something happening in the household before they went to school in Philadelphia, and I think the clue is in finding also more about the mother. So there's the lost mother as usual. We only have her name. I'm finding more. We'll find more, but we'll find that there were teachings that helped them to put that out into the world and stood them in good stead as well.
I was intrigued to pursue these stories because as we approach the centennial celebration of the passage of the 19th Amendment, I suddenly realized I was seeing all these wonderful documentaries on PBS and elsewhere, but I never heard anything about a woman from South Carolina. Literally, South Carolina was not mentioned, and I thought, well, there had to be women around South Carolina doing something in this period. I mean, we are, after all, very strong forces here. And so as I was researching it, it was interesting to me to see the references, and I think Joan Marie Johnson made that point in the film, about their impact elsewhere in the world and the interest that New York newspapers, but also you can find an article in an Arizona newspaper or an article, a little sketch somewhere else in Baltimore or in Chicago about these women from South Carolina. So I'd like for you to comment a little bit on their impact, not just here, but elsewhere.
Of Southern suffragists?
Not
Of
just
South
Southern
Carolina,
suffragists, but the Rowland sisters in particular, yes.
Well, I think part of that is once you get newspapers from New York coming down, looking at South Carolina, and you are talking about the state that had the only majority African American legislature. And so when you have And so it's unique in that sense. We are, South Carolina was predominantly African American, so in a democratic system, that's the way it should have been. That's not the way it was in other states, but they had a pretty good number as well. But South Carolina was unique in that sense. And Marjorie made the comment about, USC being the only school that actually desegregated during that time. So I think part of it is there are some unique things happening in South Carolina. So when you get a New York newspaper people coming down and they write about it, then the other newspapers write about it as well. And so it just snowballs from state to state. Different people pick up on it. And then you've got others looking at South Carolina and looking at who are these Rollins sisters? And so they get bylines and little, snippets, like you said, Arizona. So I think part of it is once you get somebody looking at you, that it does snowball. But because they are so fascinating, that there is a reason they themselves are enough. You just need somebody to start the ball moving and recognize them.
The other thing is that context is important. And as you go through and you realize the contacts, the people that they knew, the people that they came into contact with, the people who became their mentors. I mean, looking at the fact that that Frank, for example, would have been mentored by William Lloyd Garrison and by Wendell Phillips and people like that, leaders in the anti-slavery movement, and that they would actually meet the leading writers and poets and playwrights of the day, and that she would be courted by people like William Greener. Richard Greener, whom she found a bit stuffy and too intellectual. But
She has some great comments about her gentleman callers.
She did, but there's just this intermingling and interrelationship of people from so many different walks of life who were really making a difference in the world at that time. And the fact that these sisters had access to that and were party to that world is, to me, a fascinating thing.
Yes. And there are still mysteries there to uncover, I think. I think that they had access to a network of people, as you're saying, but those networks were really, really important, and more so even than today in some way, that the networks that they were going in. So they were helping each other and inspiring each other in these ways. And I think, as you say, Rollin and probably Margaret, we only speak about the father, but he was able to take them places on his boats, and there were also meetings of people in Philadelphia and Boston and so on. So those things were also happening that assisted. And Philadelphia itself was an extraordinary hotbed of amazing people and amazing teachers at the Institute for Colored Youth, which I thought completely politicized Frances Ann Rollin and the other girls as well. But I think they were already on the verge, more and more so. I think I used to think it all happened there, but now I'm thinking that there was more to them and the way they viewed the world in their household, so that they could go out and be beautiful, brainy, and have such strategies. The strategic element is really interesting.
I wonder if the three of you, if I may ask the question of the three of you, have any of you ever run across any links between them and the Grimke sisters? Because they were still very much alive, and they were in Philadelphia and by this time
Not
in
only
New Jersey, and in the in the 1870s were leading a march of women who went to the polls demanding to vote.
Well, I
even
can
when they
answer
were
that
elderly.
one.
Burl can answer.
Because in the early 1870s, when Charlotte and Kate were at D.O. Lewis's school in Boston, Angelina Grimke was teaching there.
There you go.
So, and if you listen
Yeah.
to the text of Charlotte's speech, you see remnants. I mean, you do see the influence of Grimke's writing. And so there had to be that, as well as that network of people that they affiliated with, or, you know, very much the same network of folks. And I'm talking specifically about the abolitionist network then. But it was the same network that was prevalent in Philadelphia and in Boston at that time. So,
And you also have a great connection between them and Martha Schofield, as well as when you're thinking Charlotte Fortin coming, because Martha Schofield taught at the Penn School as well, and then came, because of health reasons, she came to Aiken, South Carolina. So you also have this connection with the Fortunes and Schofield. And Schofield during the first suffrage movement in South Carolina is very active with them. She's also active in the 1890s and tries to convince her white friends to be more inclusive. That, you know, is like a lead
Good
balloon.
luck with that in
But
the
she is adamant about them being more inclusive, but it just doesn't happen.
well, we only have a few moments remaining and we don't have microphones, but is there any burning question there in the audience before I ask them for a summary statement?
A quiet audience.
Listen at the silence, it's deafening here. All right, then I'm going to ask our panelists, what is it you would like for our audiences to leave with tonight? What is there to be gleaned from this Rollin experience that can inspire us or challenge us as we go forward?
That some of the very most interesting suffragists were from, not just from South Carolina, but they lived and worked right here and had that salon just a few blocks away.
Right over there.
And were making waves in a super exciting, admirable way that I find very inspirational. And they were from here. And that's something that I think, and that you can make a film out of almost nothing in terms of visuals. That's just amazing.
I don't recommend it.
This is an amazing woman here. Their story is rich and wonderful, but you had almost no images to go with it and still made this beautiful film. It was just great.
Thank you.
I guess what I'd like you to take away is, and it comes from Ione's comment about the diary that she got from her mother, and she didn't know the diary existed. Don't throw away stuff, please. Keep your history. Make sure you share your history. It's extremely important that we look for diaries, that we look for, obituaries, that we look for things that will allow us to tell the stories.
And we label photographs.
Yes, label photographs.
Don't just send them up in the cloud where they'll disappear.
Yes. That to me, I think we really do need to pay attention to our history and not toss it.
And that there's oral history. So ask your parents, ask great aunts, ask grandmothers, ask mothers. Get stories, and don't stop immediately when they say, "Oh, nothing happened." Go back and keep asking. And it's very, very important because the stories of our mothers and foremothers and forefathers can get lost. I was shocked even today to see how many people in Colombia said to me, but we never heard about them.
Yeah.
And I thought that they would be more well known here. So now this is the opportunity. And then we talked this afternoon about a well, there's a plaque, but also that a plaque could happen, that a house could be built was one of my dreams, that we could rebuild the salon and actually have a structure, but also that there could be writings that are done under the name of prizes could be given. Actually, Frances Ann Rollin has received, there's the Rollin award for a biographical writer from the Bio International Organization. So now every year they can give this award, and they can and a writer can receive money in her name. So, and it is a Frances Ann Rollin Whipper. So Rollin is also in their award. So I was really excited about that. So something like that could happen for the Rollin sisters as well. Let's bring them back. And I feel that, you know, coming here at this time is in some way bringing little pieces of DNA back to Colombia.
Love it.
Ladies, thank you very much. And audience, thank you very much for sharing this experience with us.
Good evening. It's so good to see your faces and to be back with people again. My name is Rachel Chester, and I'm the Director of Planned Giving for the ETV Endowment. Tonight has been a very special evening. I really don't want it to end. I was standing in the wings going, don't stop, this is too good. So thank you very much. Thank you again to tonight's discussion panelists. Ione, we are so grateful that you could travel all the way to South Carolina to be with us and to share your family's important stories. It has just been really fun hearing about your journey and how you uncovered their history, and I wish you the best of luck because we want to learn even more, so thank you. Dr. Littlefield and Dr. Spurl, thank you for sharing your vast South Carolina history and women's history knowledge. We just love working with you and hope to do so again. Earlier, you said that the Rollin sisters were inspiring. I think you four are inspiring, and thank you for doing this. This has just been tremendous. Yes, I am. I will mention that at the end, yes. I first learned about the Rollin sisters when I watched ETV's Sisterhood documentary series. Beryl Dacres has once again poignantly shared the previously little-known stories that are part of South Carolina's rich and complicated history. Thank you, Beryl. And thank you to any ETV Endowment members who are with us tonight. You make documentaries like Sisterhood happen, so thank you so much for your support. Lastly, we are exceedingly grateful to our community partners for making this event possible. The University of South Carolina Center for Civil Rights History and Research sponsored and managed matters ranging from this meaningful venue to bringing Miss Lewis to our state. The University of South Carolina Society provided a wonderful exhibit of materials that document African American life in South Carolina during Reconstruction. Please take a few moments to explore these select items out in the lobby if you haven't already. Also in the lobby, we'll have Dr. Spurl's book will be at the registration table. We'll encourage you to come by and chat with her about that. Again, thank you, Center for Civil Rights and USCS. And to our partner since 1977, thank you, ETV, for producing top-notch local programming to share with our state and for your role in tonight's event, especially for facilitating the live stream. It isn't easy, and they did a fabulous job. On behalf of all of our partners, thank you for joining us tonight, either in person or virtually. Again, Please drop by the lobby. If you can, help us recycle name tags. We'll use them again. And have a good night. Safe travels.